The beast was a thing of nightmare and shadow, a creature of snapped bone and torn sinew. They called him Fenrir, a name whispered in the dark corners of the citadel, a name that tasted of blood and fear. He was the Alpha King's monster, his untamable rage given form, a massive black wolf that had crippled 3 handlers and killed a 4th. And Alara, who could not even stand on her own 2 feet, was playing with him like he was a lost puppy. From the shadows of the cavernous kennel, King Kalin watched. He stood as still as the stone around him, a ghost in his own fortress, his face a mask of cold, hard control. But inside, a storm raged. For 3 centuries he had ruled. For 3 centuries he had held his beast, his wolf, on a chain of iron guilt. No one touched Fenrir. No one approached him without whip and chain. No one saw the monster and offered it a gentle hand. No one until her. Alara was seated on the damp stone floor, her useless legs tucked to one side. She had a piece of dried fish in her hand, and the great beast, whose jaws could snap a man's spine, was taking it from her palm with the delicacy of a courtier. His massive head was level with her own. His ears, usually pinned back in a perpetual snarl, were pricked forward. His yellow eyes, normally burning with feral madness, were soft. She scratched him behind one of those ears, her fingers sinking into the thick, coarse fur. And then Kalin saw it. The thing that made the world stop on its axis. The beast's tail, a thick, powerful appendage that had only ever been used for balance in a lunge or a kill, gave a single, hesitant thump against the stone. Then another. A wag. Kalin's breath caught in his throat. The sound was like a crack in the foundation of his world. He had never seen it wag its tail. In 300 years of shared, tormented existence, he had never once seen his own soul show a flicker of simple joy. A cold, unfamiliar feeling coiled in his gut. It was not anger. It was not suspicion. It was something far more terrifying. It was hope. And he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that this broken girl would be the end of him. 3 months earlier, the world had been nothing but shades of gray and pain. Ilara's world had been the size of a single room, its borders defined by the 4 posts of her bed and the window that looked out onto a muddy courtyard. She had been born with legs that would not obey her, twisted limbs that her father, a minor lord with grand ambitions, saw as a personal affront, a stain on his name. Her stepsister, Lyra, saw them as an opportunity. Lyra was beautiful, whole, and vicious. She moved through their father's house like a hunting cat, all grace and hidden claws, and Alara was her favorite prey. "Still here, little spider?" Lyra would coo, leaning against the doorframe of Alara's room. "I thought father would have found a deep, dark hole to hide you in by now. It's almost time for the tithe. The Alpha King's men will be here. We can't have you dragging your useless body around where they can see you." Alara said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was her only shield. Her words only ever gave Lyra more ammunition. She kept her eyes on the book in her lap, a worn collection of sea charts and coastal maps. She traced the jagged lines of the Dragon's Tooth coast, the shores of the Iron Sea, the distant isles shrouded in mist. She could not walk, but in her mind she could sail. The tithe was a yearly offering of goods and service to the Alpha King, Kalin, the ruler of the northern archipelago. He was a figure of legend, a king said to be as cold and unforgiving as the winter sea itself. Lyra was obsessed with him. She dreamed of being presented at court, of catching his eye, of becoming his queen. "One of his guards was injured last year," Lyra mused, tapping a perfectly manicured nail against her chin. Father had to send 2 of his best men as replacement levies, a waste. But what if one sent something different? A gesture of loyalty, of justice. A cold dread seeped into Alara's bones. She knew that look in Lyra's eyes. It was the look she got before she did something truly cruel. The next day, the captain of her father's guard had come to her room. He would not meet her eyes. He said there had been an incident. A valuable tapestry, a gift meant for the king, had been found slashed to ribbons. Her knife, the small one she used for cutting the pages of new books, was found beside it. It was a lie. She hadn't left her room. But her father had accepted the story without question. It was the excuse he had been waiting for her entire life. "You are a disgrace to this house," he had hissed, his face mottled with rage. He did not see a daughter. He saw a flawed product. "You will be sent to the citadel. Not as a lady, but as a penitent. You will work off your debt of shame. Let the Alpha King see that the House of Valerius knows how to punish its own." Lyra had stood behind him, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She had won. She had scrubbed the stain of her broken sister from the family name and, in her twisted mind, performed an act of loyalty to the king she idolized. Ilara was put on a cart like a sack of grain. She did not cry. She did not beg. She held her book of maps tight against her chest and stared at the gray sky, feeling the familiar, hollow ache of worthlessness settle deep inside her. She was being sent to the fortress of the Monster King as a punishment. It was no less than she deserved. The citadel was a spike of black rock jutting out of a churning slate-gray sea. It smelled of salt and cold stone and something else, something wild and musky that made the hairs on her arms stand up. It was a place built to withstand sieges and winter storms, not to be a home. It was a fortress of solitude. She was dragged from the cart and left on the cold flagstones of the lower bailey. Guards and servants bustled past, their faces hard and grim. No one looked at her. She was less than invisible. She was refuse. Hours passed. The cold seeped through her thin cloak, and a damp chill settled in her bones. She clutched her book, the last piece of her old life, the only thing that was truly hers. Finally, a stern, hawk-nosed woman in the gray livery of the Citadel staff stopped before her. Her eyes swept over Ilara's crumpled form, lingering on her legs with open distaste. "You're the one from Lord Valerius? The vandal?" The woman, the housekeeper, snapped. Her name was Kira. Ilara could only nod, her throat tight. "The king has decreed you will serve in the kennels," Kira said, and a flicker of cruel satisfaction crossed her face. "To tend the beast. Maybe it'll find a use for your bones, if nothing else." A ripple of fear, cold and sharp, finally pierced Ilara's numbness. The kennels. The beast. She had heard the whispers from the men who drove the cart. A monster that even the king could not fully control. A punishment meant to be a death sentence. 2 guards hauled her, chair and all, down a series of winding, torch-lit stairs. The air grew colder, heavier, thick with the smell of wet fur, old bones, and raw meat. The sounds of the bustling citadel faded, replaced by an unnerving silence, broken only by the drip of water and the distant rhythmic crash of waves against the rock. They left her at the entrance to a vast natural cavern at the base of the citadel. An iron-barred gate, thick as a man's arm, was the only thing separating the passage from the darkness within. "Food's there. Water's there," one of the guards grunted, pointing to a bucket of bloody meat scraps and a pail of water. "Slide it through the slat at the bottom, and pray to the old gods he's not hungry for more than mutton." Then they were gone, their footsteps echoing away, leaving her in the oppressive gloom. She was alone with the monster. From the depths of the cavern, 2 points of yellow light ignited. They floated in the darkness, burning with a cold, intelligent fire. A low growl rumbled through the stone, a sound so deep and powerful she felt it in her chest, a vibration that rattled her very bones. This was it, the end of her worthless life. She was a broken toy, thrown into the monster's cage. And in that moment, a strange sort of peace settled over her. She had nothing left to lose. Fear was a luxury for people who had hope. Slowly, painfully, she lowered herself from her worn wooden chair to the floor. She dragged her body forward, her arms trembling with the effort, until she was sitting before the iron gate. She did not try to push the food through. She simply sat, her back against the cold, damp rock, and looked into the darkness. "Hello," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "My name is Alara." The growling stopped. The yellow eyes blinked. "They sent me here to die, I think," she continued, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "But they've been trying to get rid of me my whole life. You'll have to get in line." A huff of air, hot and smelling of blood, gusted from the darkness. A massive, shadowy form shifted. The beast took a step forward, then another. He was larger than any wolf she had ever read about, a creature of pure primal power. His fur was the color of a starless midnight, his muscles coiled like thick ropes beneath his skin. Scars, old and new, crisscrossed his muzzle and flanks. He stopped just shy of the bars, his great head lowered, those burning eyes fixed on her. He was not just a monster. He was magnificent and lonely. The loneliness poured off him in waves, a profound, aching isolation that she recognized as if it were her own. He was a prisoner, just like her. She saw the pain in his eyes, the torment of a power too great to be contained. She did not see a monster. She saw a kindred spirit. She stayed there for hours, talking to him. She told him about her books, about the sea, about the constellations she could see from her window. She spoke of her father's cold ambition and Lyra's casual cruelty. She poured out all the words she had held inside for a lifetime, offering them to the silent, captive beast. He did not move. He just watched her, his head cocked, listening. For the first time in her life, she felt seen. Kaelin did not visit the kennels. He did not need to. The beast was a part of him, an extension of his own soul. He felt its rage, its hunger, its bone-deep ache of confinement. For centuries, since the Battle of the Weeping Plains, his wolf had been a torment. It was the guilt he carried, the physical manifestation of his greatest failure. He had hesitated, and a village had burned. Women and children had died because he had been afraid. Not of the enemy, but of the power inside him. He had locked his wolf away in the dungeons of his own mind, and it had become a monster. So when a new sensation trickled through their bond, he was startled. It was not the usual simmering fury. It was curiosity, a quiet, watchful stillness. He felt it when the girl was brought down. He felt the beast's initial surge of snarling territorialism, and then, nothing. Just a profound, listening silence. He dismissed it. The girl would be dead by morning. It was a cruel fate, but the Citadel was a cruel place. He had a kingdom to run, enemies to watch, a gnawing emptiness to endure. He had no time for a crippled, disgraced girl. He was a king, not a savior. He had learned the hard way that trying to save people only got them killed. But she did not die. Days turned into a week. And the sensation from his wolf grew. The curiosity deepened. He felt a flicker of something else, something he couldn't name. A lessening of the constant grinding pressure in his own chest. He began to hear things, whispers among the staff. The crippled girl was still alive. She spent all her time by the gate. She talked to the beast. She sang to it sometimes, soft, sad songs of the sea. Kira, the housekeeper, reported to him, her face tight with disapproval. "She is a witch, Your Majesty. She has enchanted the beast. It will not eat the scraps we give it. It only eats what she offers." Kaelin had said nothing, but a seed of doubt was planted. A witch? Or something else? He knew his beast. It could not be enchanted. It was rage and guilt and primal instinct. It could only be met with greater force or absolute submission. It could not be tamed. He started having his own meals brought to his solar, the high, lonely room at the peak of the Citadel. He found he had no appetite. He could feel the beast's hunger, But it was a different kind of hunger now. Not for blood, but for presence, for the sound of the girl's voice. He began to resent her, this broken, useless girl. Who was she to come into his fortress and disturb the bitter, predictable balance of his torment? He saw her as a contamination, a weakness. She was a variable in an equation he had spent centuries trying to solve. He decided he would go down there and put an end to it. He would order the guards to remove her, to put her to work scrubbing floors where she belonged. He went at night, cloaked in shadow, his footsteps silent. He was the king. He did not need a torch. He knew every stone of his prison. He found her asleep, curled on a pile of old sacks she had dragged near the gate. Her book was open in her lap. And inside the kennel, the beast was not pacing, not snarling. It was lying down, its massive body pressed against the bars, as close to her as it could get. Its breathing was slow and even. It was at peace. Kalen stopped, hidden in the archway. He felt it through the bond, a profound, restful calm he had not known in 300 years. The gnawing rage was gone. The restless energy was still. For the first time, his own mind was quiet. He looked at the girl. In the faint light filtering from a high grate, her face was pale, her features delicate. Her hair, a tumble of dark curls, was messy. She looked impossibly fragile, a broken bird. And she had done what his armies, his titles, his centuries of iron will could not. She had soothed the beast. He did not order her away. He turned and walked back up the stairs, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and a strange, unfamiliar ache. He saw her as a threat not to his kingdom, but to the walls he had built around his own dead heart. He decided to let her stay. For now. He would watch her. He would understand how she was doing this. He saw her as a puzzle to be solved, a weapon to be understood, a genuine adversary to the miserable peace he had made with his own damnation. Their strange, silent relationship continued. Ilara would spend her days by the gate, and Kalen would watch from the shadows. He learned her routines. He saw how she would painstakingly clean the beast's side of the cavern, dragging a broom with her arms, pulling buckets of clean water to wash the stones. He saw how she would save the best pieces of meat for Fenrir, picking them out from the slop bucket with her bare hands. He saw her talking to the beast, her voice a low murmur. He couldn't hear the words, but he could see the effect. He saw the massive wolf rest its head on its paws, its eyes soft. He saw it nudge a discarded bone closer to the bars for her, an offering. He started sending better food down. Cuts of fresh venison, fish from the morning's catch. He told Kira it was to keep the beast's strength up. He told himself the same thing. It was a lie. He was feeding the girl. Ilara noticed the change in the food. She thought one of the kitchen boys had taken pity on her. It never occurred to her that it came from the king. The king was a figure of cold, distant power. A tyrant who allowed his staff to throw a crippled girl into a monster's den. She hated him for his cruelty, for the casual disregard that had defined her entire existence. He was just a more powerful version of her father. One evening, a storm rolled in from the Iron Sea. Thunder cracked like the sky breaking apart, and lightning lit the cavern in stark, terrifying flashes. Fenrir was frantic. He paced and snarled, his claws scraping against the stone. The sound was deafening, the rage pouring from him a palpable force. Ilara was terrified, but not of the beast. She was afraid for him. She could feel his panic, his primal terror of the storm. Without thinking, she pulled herself close to the bars, her hands gripping the cold iron. "Shh, it's all right," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "It's just noise. It can't hurt you in here. I'm here. I won't leave you." The beast stopped its pacing. It turned its massive head, its eyes wild. It let out a whimpering sound, a noise so full of pain and fear it broke her heart. "I know," she whispered. "I know you're scared. I get scared too." She began to sing, an old sailor's shanty her mother used to sing to her, a song about a ship finding its way home through a storm. Her voice was small against the thunder, but it was steady. Slowly, the great beast sank to the ground. It crawled toward her, pressing itself against the bars again, and rested its head near her hands. She reached her fingers through the bars, not touching him, but just being close. He closed his eyes, and his trembling subsided. From the shadows, Kalen watched, and his heart, a thing he had thought long dead, gave a painful lurch. The storm did not frighten his wolf. His wolf was the storm. The beast was reacting to his own buried memory. The night the village burned, there had been a storm. The thunder had covered the screams. The girl was not calming the beast. She was calming him. He felt an overwhelming, terrifying urge to go to her, to thank her, to touch her. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He was the Alpha King. He did not feel gratitude. He did not feel need. He was a fortress. He turned and fled from the warmth she offered, back to the cold safety of his solitude. He hated her for making him feel. He hated himself for wanting it. The news that Lyra was coming to the Citadel arrived like a shard of ice in Alara's gut. Her father had sent a message. Lyra was to be presented to the king, a reward for her family's unflinching loyalty. Alara knew what that meant. Lyra was coming to claim her prize, and to gloat. When Lyra swept into the kennels a week later, she was a vision of courtly perfection. She wore a gown of emerald silk. Her hair was a marvel of intricate braids, and she smelled of expensive perfume that did little to mask the scent of her venom. 2 hulking guards stood behind her, their faces grim. "Sister," Lyra said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I see you found your place. Among the animals and the filth. It suits you." Alara said nothing. She was sitting with her back to the gate, mending a tear in one of the old sacks she used as a cushion. Fenrir was quiet behind her, a silent, watchful presence. "The king is a remarkable man," Lyra prattled on, walking the perimeter of the cavern as if inspecting it. "So powerful, so decisive. He appreciates justice. He was very impressed when father told him how we dealt with your little crime." Alara's hands stilled. There was no crime. Lyra laughed, a high, tinkling sound that grated on the nerves. "Oh, Alara, still so naive? Does it matter? You're here. I'm here. And soon I will be queen. And my first act will be to clean the citadel of its refuse." Her eyes flickered toward Alara's legs with undisguised contempt. A low growl rumbled from behind Alara, deep and menacing. Lyra's eyes widened slightly. She finally seemed to notice the massive black wolf lying directly behind her sister, separated only by the iron bars. "My gods, it's hideous. They let you tend to that thing?" "His name is Fenrir," Alara said quietly. "I don't care what its name is," Lyra snapped, her composure cracking. She had expected to find Alara broken and weeping, not calm and composed. It infuriated her. "It's a monster, just like you, a broken, useless thing that should have been put down at birth." The growl deepened into a snarl. Fenrir rose to his feet, a mountain of black fur and coiled muscle. His lips peeled back from his teeth, revealing fangs as long as daggers. Saliva dripped from his jaws. Lyra took a step back, her mask of superiority falling away to reveal raw fear. "Guards, control that thing!" The guards stepped forward, raising their spears, but they were hesitant. They knew the beast's reputation. "It's all right, Fen," Alara whispered, not turning around. "She's not worth it." But Lyra, enraged at being challenged, was not finished. She saw Alara's book of maps lying beside her. With a swift, vicious kick, she sent it skittering across the floor, its spine breaking, pages tearing as it hit the far wall. "No!" The cry was torn from Alara's throat. It was the only thing she had. That was the final straw. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the citadel, Fenrir launched himself at the gate. The iron bars, thick as a man's arm, groaned and buckled under the impossible force of his impact. The lock shattered. The gate flew open. Lyra screamed, a raw, piercing shriek of terror. She stumbled backward, falling in a heap of emerald silk. The guards were frozen, their faces ashen. Fenrir was out. He stood over Lyra, his massive form blotting out the torchlight. He was the incarnation of death, a shadow of rage. He lowered his head, his hot breath washing over her face, a low, guttural snarl vibrating in his chest. Ilara dragged herself forward, her heart pounding. "Fen, no, stop!" But the beast did not listen. He was lost to the rage. And then another voice cut through the chaos, cold, sharp, and absolute. "Enough." King Kalin stood in the archway. He was no longer a shadow. He was a presence, radiating a power so immense it seemed to suck the air from the cavern. His eyes, the same burning yellow as his beasts, were locked on the wolf. Fenrir froze. He whined, a low, conflicted sound, torn between his protective fury and the command of his alpha. "I said enough," Kalin repeated, his voice softer now, but no less powerful. He walked forward, his gaze never leaving his wolf. He stepped between the beast and Lyra, placing himself directly in the path of the monster's rage. He did not look at Lyra. He did not look at the guards. He looked at Ilara, who was struggling to pull herself toward her ruined book. His eyes, for a fleeting moment, softened with an emotion she could not decipher. Then the cold mask slammed back into place. He turned his attention to the cowering Lyra. "You," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any warmth. "Have you finished your performance?" Lyra stared at him, speechless, her face a mess of tears and terror. "You came to my home," Kalin continued, his voice dangerously quiet. "You abused a member of my household. You lied to gain an audience. And you threatened my property." His eyes flickered to Fenrir, then back to Lyra. "I do not suffer liars, and I do not reward cruelty." He raised a hand. "Guards, escort this woman from my citadel. Her and her entire family are banished from the northern archipelago. If I ever see her face again, I will not be so merciful." The guards, jolted into action, hauled a sobbing, protesting Lyra to her feet and dragged her away. The cavern fell silent. It was just Ilara, Kalin, and the beast. Fenrir, his rage subsiding, nudged his massive head against Kalin's hand. Kalin rested his hand on the wolf's head, a gesture of quiet communion. But his eyes were on Ilara. She had reached her book. She was gathering the torn pages, her hands trembling, her face pale. She didn't look at him. She expected him to be furious. She had broken the rules. She had let the beast out. He walked over to her. He knelt, an impossibly large and powerful man folding himself down to her level. She flinched, expecting a blow. Instead, his large calloused hands began to help her gather the scattered pages. His touch was surprisingly gentle. He picked up the broken spine, his expression unreadable. "This can be repaired," he said, his voice a low rumble. She finally looked up at him. His face was inches from hers. She saw the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the deep, ancient sorrow that he could not quite hide. He was not just a tyrant. He was a man in pain. "Why?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Why what? Why did you help me?" His eyes, those burning yellow pools, held hers. "Because he chose you," Kalin said, his gaze flicking to Fenrir, who had lain down beside Ilara and rested his head in her lap. "And I am beginning to understand why." He stood, taking the broken book with him. "You will no longer serve in the kennels. A room is being prepared for you in the upper citadel. You are under my protection now." He turned and walked away without another word, Fenrir padding silently at his heels. Ilara was left alone on the cold stone floor, her world once again turned upside down. She had been saved by the Monster King, and she didn't know if that was a punishment or a reward. The obvious threat was gone, But Alara soon learned that her stepsister had been the least of her worries. Her new life in the Upper Citadel was a different kind of prison. She had a warm room, soft clothes, and good food, but she was more isolated than ever. The castle staff, led by the perpetually disapproving Kira, treated her with a mixture of fear and scorn. They saw her as the king's pet, a witch who had somehow ensnared him and his beast. The whispers followed her everywhere. Kaelin was a distant, brooding presence. He did not visit her. He did not speak to her. But she felt his eyes on her sometimes as she was wheeled through the corridors by a silent servant. He was always watching. The real change was within him. With Lyra's venomous presence gone and Alara safe, the calm he had felt from his wolf began to seep deeper into his own soul. For the first time in centuries, the constant, grinding guilt began to recede. But in its place, other feelings started to surface, long-buried emotions, like frozen things thawing in a spring sun. He felt the warmth of the fire in the great hall. He tasted the salt in the air. He felt longing. And with that longing, the memories came back, sharper and more painful than ever. The smell of smoke, the sound of a child crying, the weight of his own inaction. His guilt was no longer a roaring beast, it was a cold, sharp knife twisting in his gut. Alara had not banished his demon, she had simply changed its shape. The King's Council, a group of old, grim-faced alphas, noticed the change in him, and they saw the way his eyes would follow the crippled girl. They saw the way the beast, once a symbol of his untamable power, now sometimes padded at his heels in the gardens, calm and controlled. They did not see this as healing. They saw it as a weakness. Elder Vorlag, the head of the council, was a man carved from granite and tradition. He believed the king's strength came from his cold detachment. The girl is a blight, he argued in a closed council meeting. She is an outsider, a cripple. Her bond with the royal wolf is unnatural. It is a parasite, draining the king's rage, the very thing that protects this land. The council decided to act. They saw Alara as a threat to the stability of the kingdom. They needed to expose her, to break her hold on the king. Their opportunity came during the midwinter feast. The great hall was filled with the pack's lesser lords and allies. It was a rare time of gathering, a show of the king's power. Kaelin had insisted Alara be there. She sat in her chair near the hearth, away from the main table, feeling small and out of place. In the middle of the feast, Elder Vorlag stood, his goblet raised. "A toast," he boomed, his voice silencing the hall. "To the king, and to the strength of his line." The hall echoed with cheers, but Vorlag was not finished. He turned, his cold eyes landing on Alara. "We are a people of strength," he declared. "Our power is in our blood, in our bodies. We are wolves. We do not suffer weakness. And yet, a weakness has been allowed to fester in our very heart." A hush fell over the hall. Kaelin, seated on his throne, went rigid. His eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint appearing in their depths. A crippled girl, a commoner, has somehow formed a bond with the royal wolf, Vorlag announced, pointing a damning finger at Alara. "This is not a blessing, it is a curse. Her brokenness is a conduit for a dark magic, a parasitic bond that is draining our king's power, leaving us vulnerable. She is not a companion to the beast, she is its keeper, and she is bleeding it dry." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The lords and ladies stared at Alara, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and growing hostility. Her disability, her otherness, was now proof of her guilt. The hidden nature of her bond was being twisted into a weapon against her. "This is a lie." Kaelin's voice was a low growl, but before he could say more, the great doors of the hall burst open. A guard, his face pale and bloodied, stumbled in. "Your Majesty, ships, in the bay, an armada flying the banner of the Stonefang Pack." Chaos erupted. The Stonefang Pack were old rivals from across the sea, brutal raiders known for their savagery. Vorlag seized the moment. You see, he roared, his voice ringing with fanatic conviction. The king's power wanes, and our enemies are at the gate. The witch has made us weak. He drew a long ceremonial knife from his belt. The curse must be purged. He advanced on Alara, his eyes wild with zealotry. The lords, caught up in the panic and fear, did not move to stop him. They saw her as the cause of their doom. Alara was frozen in her chair, a rabbit before a wolf. There was nowhere to run. Vorlog, no! Kaelin roared, leaping from his throne. But the hall was in chaos. Other council members loyal to Vorlog moved to intercept him, their own blades drawn. The invaders were at the gates, and his own council was betraying him. The crisis was here. She was in danger. Vorlog reached her, his hand grabbing a fistful of her hair, yanking her head back. The knife came up, its silver edge glinting in the firelight. For the good of the pack, he snarled. A black shape exploded from the shadows near the throne. It was Fenrir. With a deafening roar, he launched himself across the hall. He was not a wolf now. He was a tidal wave of fury. He slammed into Vorlog, sending the old alpha flying. The knife clattered across the floor. But the danger was not over. Stonefang warriors were now pouring into the hall, their axes and swords reaping a bloody toll. The Citadel guards, caught between the invaders and the internal mutiny, were in disarray. Kaelin fought his way through the melee, his own greatsword a blur of silver. His eyes were locked on Alara. He had to get to her. He cut down 2 Stonefang warriors and one of his own treacherous councilmen, his face a mask of cold fury. He had let his guilt paralyze him once before. He would not make that mistake again. He reached her side just as the Stonefang Alpha, a brute of a man with a scarred face and a cruel smile, broke through the line. The Alpha saw Kaelin, saw Alara, and saw his opportunity. The great Kaelin, brought low by a broken pet. The Stonefang Alpha sneered, raising his massive rune-etched axe. I will take your throne and your whore. He swung, not at Kaelin, but at Alara. Kaelin moved faster than thought. He threw himself in front of her, his own body shielding hers. He brought his sword up to block, but the axe was too powerful. It sheared through his sword and bit deep into his shoulder and chest, a mortal wound. Kaelin grunted, staggering back. He fell to one knee, the light beginning to fade from his eyes. He had saved her, but it had cost him everything. The Stonefang Alpha laughed, raising his axe for the final blow. Alara screamed. She scrambled from her chair, dragging her useless body across the floor to him. She cradled his head in her lap, her tears falling onto his pale face. The battle raged around them, a maelstrom of sound and death, but her world had shrunk to the dying man in her arms. Kaelin, she sobbed. He looked up at her, a faint, sad smile on his lips. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. I'm sorry, he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. I was a fool. So much time, wasted in the cold. Don't talk, she pleaded. Save your strength. No, must. He reached a trembling hand to her face, his touch a ghostly caress. It was never about the beast, Alara. It was always about me. You didn't soothe him. You saved me. His eyes, losing their golden light, met hers. I love you. I think. I have from the moment I saw my monster wag its tail. The love confession, spoken under the shadow of death, shattered the last of her own walls. This great, powerful, tormented king loved her, the broken girl. I love you too, she whispered through her tears. His eyes fluttered closed. His hand fell away. His breathing stopped. He was gone. A cold, empty silence fell over her heart, a void more terrifying than any sound of battle. He was gone. The man she loved was dead. The world had taken the one good thing she had ever known. No. The word was not spoken. It was a feeling. A deep, primal refusal that rose from the very core of her being. No. She would not accept this. She would not let him go. She pressed her hands to the gaping wound in his chest, pouring all of her love, her grief, her desperate, hopeless will into him. She felt the bond between them, the fragile thread that had connected her to Fenrir, and through him, to Kalin. It was frayed, fading, about to snap as his life force guttered out. She held onto it. She wrapped her entire being around that thread and pulled. "You will not die," she whispered, her voice raw with power. "I will not let you." And then, something inside her broke. Or perhaps, something was finally unlocked. It was not her power. It was their power. Her love, her soul, became a conduit. She felt a surge of energy, a torrent of life force, not from her, but through her. It flowed down her arms, into her hands, and into Kalin's still body, a river of pure silver light. The world erupted in brilliance. A wave of energy, visible and potent, exploded outward from them. It was not fire or force. It was life. It was renewal. The wave washed over the great hall. The dying groaned and sat up. The wounded found their injuries closing. The very stones of the citadel seemed to hum with a new vitality. The Stonefang warriors, untouched by the healing wave, cried out in terror. They saw Elara, kneeling over their king, glowing with a soft silver light that was more terrifying than any weapon. Kalin's body, in her arms, was also beginning to glow, a fierce, molten gold. The Stonefang Alpha stared, his face a mask of disbelief. What? What are you? Kalin's eyes snapped open. They were no longer just yellow. They were solid gold, blazing with a power that was ancient and absolute. The wound in his chest was gone. He rose to his feet in a single, fluid motion, pulling Elara up with him. He held her close, her feet dangling off the ground, her body weight nothing to him. He was whole. The guilt, the hesitation, the centuries of cold torment. They were not gone, but they were integrated. They were a part of his strength now, tempered by the silver light of her love. He felt his wolf, not as a separate, raging beast, but as a part of his own soul, complete and at peace. He looked at the Stonefang Alpha, and his voice was the sound of the sea and the storm, of the earth and the sky. "I am the king of this land," he said. "And this," he said, his golden eyes softening as he looked down at Elara, "is my queen." Her own eyes were glowing, a soft, steady silver. Her power was the bond. It amplified his. It completed him. Together, they were more than just two people. They were a force of nature. The remaining invaders threw down their weapons and fell to their knees. They had come to fight a wolf king. They had found gods. The battle was over. The traitors were rounded up. The invaders were taken as prisoners. But Kalin and Elara saw none of it. They stood in the center of the ruined hall, holding each other, just breathing. He was alive. She was whole. The world had tried to break them, and it had only forged them into something stronger. He gently lowered her back into her chair, his hands lingering on her arms. He knelt before her, the great Alpha King on his knees before the girl he had once dismissed as worthless. "You saved me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "No," she whispered, reaching out to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "We saved each other." He captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not her broken limbs, but the impossible strength of her spirit. He saw the woman who had faced his monster without fear, who had healed his soul with a whisper, who had defied death itself for him. He saw his mate, his equal, his everything. 3 months later, the citadel was transformed. The grim black stone seemed warmer, softened by the new life that bloomed within it. The crash of the waves against the shore sounded less like a battle and more like a heartbeat. The northern archipelago was at peace, ruled by a king who had found his heart and a queen who had found her power. Elara never walked. Her legs remained as they were, but it no longer mattered. She had found a different way to move through the world. Through the bond, she could feel the entire pack, every man, woman, and child in their territory. She felt their joys, their sorrows, their fears. Her empathy, once a source of private pain, was now her greatest strength. She advised Kaelin with a wisdom and compassion the kingdom had never known. Her official title was Queen, but the people called her the Heart of the Pack. Kaelin was a different king. The cold, ruthless ruler was gone, replaced by a man of quiet strength and profound warmth. The guilt of his past was still there, a scar on his soul, but it no longer defined him. Alara's love was a constant, gentle light that kept the shadows at bay. The evening was calm, the sky a tapestry of violet and rose. They were in the gardens that overlooked the sea, a place Alara had only ever seen in her books. Kaelin sat on a stone bench, and she was in his lap, her head resting against his chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. Fenrir, no longer a beast of nightmare but a magnificent black wolf, lay at their feet. His head was resting on Alara's knee, and his eyes were closed in contentment. Kaelin leaned down, his lips brushing her hair. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured. "The sea," she whispered. "I used to dream of sailing away on it, to find a place where no one would look at me with pity. And now?" She turned her head, her silver eyes meeting his gold. She smiled, a real radiant smile that made his heart ache with love. "Now I know I was never meant to sail away. I was meant to be an anchor." He kissed her, a long, slow kiss full of promises and tomorrows. It tasted of salt and love and home. As he held her, Fenrir shifted at their feet. The great black wolf let out a contented sigh, and his tail gave a single, solid thump against the stone path. Then another, and another. A steady, happy rhythm that was the new song of their kingdom. The song of a beast who was finally at peace, and a king who had finally come home.